Can I do a station ID?
Oh my god, you can do a station ID!
I would love to do a station ID.
Like your station or
your station? I want to do your station.
Oh my gosh.
What's your station?
It's the FM is 91.7 and the ID is WHUS stores.
WHUS stores 91.7?
Yeah.
Okay. So oh my god, wait.
Going into this, I was like, fuck, I just want to ask her about like every single song. Like I want to hear what every single thing means, but I know that would take like a million years, and so I'm not gonna do that to you. But like, I think especially with your new album, because it is about transitioning. If you want to like pick and choose some songs to talk about, like I would just be so happy to hear about like the thought process behind them.
Sure. I mean, each one of the songs that I've written is different, and like they all start from different places as well.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the songs started as guitar songs, and some of them started as like beats. You know, I made the beat first. Mm-hmm. Some of them started as lyrics. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I mean, all of them came out pretty organically, or like based off of like a poem I would write in the middle of the night, or like. Some of them were just like, I'd play the beat and then I would just say something, and then I would find that whatever I said was like really true, and I was like, oh my god. And then I was like, well, I have to keep working with that, and then I would, work on a song like that. Some of them I sat down and was like, okay, I'm gonna write a song. I have this chord structure that I like. How do I make this sound? How do I, like, what melody would be good here? Oh, I'm gonna do that. And then what words would fit that melody? Kind of like how, some people will write like syllabically, so it'll be like, okay, I know I want the word here to have 6 syllables. What could it be? And that ends up like with me using a lot of words that I wouldn't normally use in conversation. But then I like allow it to push me there, and then I'm like, whoa, what's the resonance of that word? Right. That's a really cool word,
That particular part of the process, like with writing, that reminds me of the second to last track on your new album, and I'm forgetting what it's called, but you did
Call Me Up? Oh, no.
Oh, third to last.
Oh, sure. The World That Love Made, yeah.
Yes.
That song is crazy to me.
That song is crazy.
That song is like so crazy to me because it's actually an excerpt from a sci-fi novel I'm writing.
Oh my god.
Yeah, which is like, it's pretty far away from being done. But it's like, it's this novel about like these people who use like essentially like the resonance of their own souls together in order to like affect the world around them. And so like, it's just like but I kind of like purposely left it pretty esoteric on the album because I was like, I don't really need everyone to know about this.
Right.
Like y'all can just enjoy the words for a second, because that's what the experience that I'm trying to convey that was like happening in the story was I was trying to convey the feeling that listening to somebody sing and really mean it means, and have somebody play and really mean it, and like what it means to witness people who are performing and going there like emotionally, and like what the power of that can do, because it's huge. It's like, it's massive,
Yeah.
So and it always, in the story that I'm writing, it there's like quite a like exact effect. The effect is like the earth splitting open so that like magma flow can be diverted and like not, it's like that's what the song is talking about. It's talking about these people singing so as to split the earth.
Wow. Wow.
Right?
I'm so glad I know that.
It's some deep Lucía Beyond lore. Yeah, but that song, it's also about the romantic love that we find in each other, because that is a sort of connection. And like the characters in that story are all embroiled in romance and like lust and desire and community and things with each other.
Right.
So there's like that each one of those things is one piece of the web that like that binds them all together.
I think it's really beautiful that you're articulating these ideas through the lens of sci-fi, because they are really inseparable from the reality we are in, right? Like,
yeah.
I don't know, I've been doing a lot of thinking about like what queerness and transness mean to me, and like what love means, and it always comes back to like the connectivity of all life forms and like carbon-based life, right? Like,
yes, yeah, that shit is beautiful.
I know, like the carbon that our bodies are holding is going to be released and create other bodies and other life forms. Like, on such a large scale, and I think recognizing that has been a very integral part of like transness and identity for me.
Yeah, like getting things down to its roots. I mean, that's actually where I kind of got the idea of resonance, right? It's because like cells and energy are constantly vibrating. That is what creates like aliveness, I guess, in them.
Yeah.
And sentience and things like that come afterwards, and those are incredibly complex. I won't try to explain those, but
Yeah.
down to the simplest stuff. I mean, all of this, everything around us is vibrating. Because if it wasn't vibrating, it would be freezing. It would be like 0 degrees Kelvin or something.
Yeah.
And so, the idea of like amplifying your own vibrations and combining your vibrations with other people, and like, I mean, the feeling that you get when like you're touching somebody that you're like really in love with, and your heart is like racing all around. It's like, that's vibration. That's sound. That's like one of the lowest kind of common denominators of sound. And when you hear music and like, it has all of these affects that like remind you of other places and other times you've heard music. But at the end of the day, it's just like vibrations that, and those vibrations, the way that they feel in your body are those things that create memory. And so, yeah, music is, I love music.
Music is so powerful.
I love music.
It is a great connector. I think like I really get the sense that you are inseparable from your music.
Yeah, I mean, I think about my music all the time. I'm like, and the songs come really slow. Like my last album, Saccharine, was like 17 or 18? No, it was 2019.
I remember reading on your Bandcamp that you spent like 4 years on it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been writing these songs for Airborne Fantasy Unlimited for 4 years. God, it feels really cool to say that name. I've been saying that name to myself for years. Yeah. I've known that this album was going to be called Airborne Fantasy Unlimited for years. Right? Because it came to me once and I was like, wow, like everything I'm doing is just like it's just a fantasy of flying, really. But it's also so much bigger than that. Because there's actually no limits to it.
Right.
How far you can go with the fantasy, and then it can almost become something real.
I'm curious, like, what you mean by the fantasy.
Without sounding like too much of a hater, all of this shit is fake. Like all of it. All of the stuff around us is fake. That's broad. That's way too broad, actually. Let me reel that back a little bit.
Okay.
So much of the stuff around us is fake. The ways that we put on performances, gender is fake. I think we're all kind of, most people I know are pretty past that at this point.
Right.
Yeah, all of the words we use are made up. We made them up because they felt close to what the feeling was, but they're not ever perfect, And that's why we make up new words. That's why new words come about. Right. And so all of these things that we make are just like fantasies. I mean, the fantasy of being an American is like this dream of success and this dream of stability and comfort and wealth, really. And that's all around us all the time. And that's just a fantasy. Because the reality is that these people work every single day of their lives. Everyone works all the time, always working. That's all we do. But they're carried along by this fantasy. And so I was like, well, what's my fantasy? Like the fantasy that pushes me along. And it's the sci-fi world. It's like, it's thinking about music as magic and resonance. And all of those things are, yes, they're fantastical. Yes, they're not real, but neither is neither is a lot of the stuff that other people believe in. But I think that the things, if I'm going to choose to believe into a fantasy, I want it to be a really beautiful one. I want it to be like the most beautiful fantasy. Because then I'll move towards it, and then my life will become more beautiful because of that. And unfortunately, there are material constraints on us, like that are enforced by force, law, the police, that enforce us to stay where we are supposed to be.
Right.
Like you see, Austin has a really large problem with houselessness. There's a lot of people who cannot afford rent in this city.
Right.
And they're just living on the street and walking around this festival, we walk by them and we just look at them and you know, I try to give people money when I can, you know, but I mean, shit, I just had a car bill.
Right.
If I don't have a car, I can't get to gigs, I can't make money. All of these material constraints are unfortunately very, very real. But so that's, I think, why all of this stuff is a fantasy, because I can't pretend that every single day feels like the world that love made, you know, or that every day feels like true love, that song, for example, because it doesn't, you know, and all of these things. And then, you know, part of the album is reckoning with that as well. You know, like Ocean is quite a dark song. Oh,
I loved Ocean. When it started, I was like, yes.
That song's, yeah. I mean, that song is about just like frustration within myself about not being who I want to be, and like being ashamed of things I've done in the past, and you know, being ashamed of who I am now, and trying to figure out how to like forgive myself and heal myself through those things, you know. And then how we talk about it is about learning to forgive someone else, you know.
I was gonna ask about how we talk about it, because to me that actually read like coming out, and how difficult that conversation can be.
That song is about, I mean, that song is mainly about people whose truths don't align. Because I had a relationship with somebody who, our truth, like who we were and who we wanted to be, and like, and how we wanted to like exist in the world were so different. And I didn't want to live in his world like that anymore.
Right.
Because I was like, if I allow myself to stay here, I will be like letting go of things that I hold dear, like principles that I hold dear. Yeah. If I like choose comfort in this scenario, I will be stuck. And so the idea is, you know, if this is how we talk about it, then there's nothing left to say. Like,
right.
And then there's that, you know, I put this like really dramatic key change in the song, so as to kind of like, I guess punctuate that moment of departure.
Right.
And then it goes into this, that chord progression that's, I'm playing it in my head. Yeah. And the lyric, what's the lyric? Summertime and all the loving in the world is easy. Take me back to where I'm from.
Take me back to where I'm from.
Right, that one hit. And I was just thinking, you know, I was thinking about like, where is it that I call home? What is it that like is home to me? Why? Look how far away from it I've become in interest to like make peace with this person's way of being. Right. And then I was like, I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna go back home to wherever, you know, whatever home feels like. Yeah. So I think that can be applied to many people's lives. I mean, it sounds like that resonates pretty strongly with your experience. Yeah. But it's hard because you do wanna go back in some time.
You are so connected with the music. You are the music to such an extent that your personal journey reads really visibly.
Yeah, wow. Thank you. That's the journey from Spyro. Spyro was like about this moment of transition, right?
Yeah.
It's about Spyro. It's the most explicit one. And it opens and closes the album, right, in different ways, which was really important to me to do because I had to include both versions of Spyro.
Right. And it's really neat. I think Saccharine punctuated this really well too, but the variability of your sound is so cool. Like the way some tracks are like pure electronica, the way some of it is just noise, and then some of it like you're on guitar. I really like Flat as an Iron, You Cut Right Through Me.
Whoa, yeah.
The piano sound. I honestly was wondering about how you made those sounds, because it sounds like piano pedals, but then there are parts where you kind of integrate that sound with what sounds like a train, like a subway train.
Okay, I'll tell you how I made that song actually, because that song is really cool. I made that song between LA and Boston because I was like I was living in LA doing audio engineering stuff, and I was working at the studio where they had had the key to the studio, so I was in there all the time, and like super late, and they had an OB6, which is like this beautiful synth, and there was a few different like. I was playing with presets on it, and I was playing with just like the tones of it. So I made that sound, that like da 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 da, that sound. And then when I went back to Boston, I had done this other piece earlier, or just even like it was a voice memo I put on my phone, where I was doing like I was playing this piano and it was really creaky and like really every time I pushed the pedal down, it was like falling apart. And so I started, playing with between that and the actual keys, and then actually like I was hitting the pianos at the times as well.
Oh wow!
So like that, I forget if there's a knocking sound on that one. There's a knocking sound on somewhere on the album, I think. Oh no, never mind. That's another thing. But maybe so. I don't know.
Maybe.
But yeah, I was using the creak of the piano keys, and then I was using this digital synth. And then those lyrics kind of came to me in like in just a rush, and then I was like, I don't know what they mean. And then in the coming weeks and stuff, as I started saying them over and over again, I was like, oh, that's what that means. Like those all have a lot of meaning, actually. But yeah, so it's a combination of it's a combination of a piece. I guess I just recorded myself with an old piano, and then that OB6. I don't ever want to be too straight on. I used to write lyrics that were pretty straight on. And then I felt frustrated with them because I was like, there's not like another layer there. And so then I started thinking about the way that words feel in my mouth and like writing stuff off of that. Like tungsten, for example. I love that word. I use that on Call Me Up. And like tantamount I used, which was like it doesn't need to be there to like get the moment across, but it's so like just a nice word to say.
I remember,
and it takes it to another place. Yeah.
With the use of tungsten specifically, I remember hearing that and just being like, whoa,
tungsten.
Whoa.
Well, because like there's no other. Okay, well the other thing is there's no other word that describes that exact color of like one of those incandescent bulbs that like that's just usually like a bare bulb, and it's like that red orange. It's tungsten. That's the color of it. It's a tungsten spotlight.
Wow.
Woo! That's like, that song. Oh my God. I wrote that song in North Carolina with my friend Joseph Kisol, and then like we were kind of playing around with it with my friend Gabe Foxbeck, who goes by Solomon Fox. And then I came back and I was like playing with it. I was playing around with it with my friend Satara, and I was like, you should hop on this. You would be really great.
And that's where the feature is.
Yeah, it's only feature on the album, but I'm really... and my friend Zylo helped co-produce Broken Wing. But other than that, everything else is me.
Yeah. I was reading the Bandcamp description for the album, and it made sense that it was all you like doing the production work, because it is such a personal album and you have such a command over the sound.
Yeah, that was a big part of like what's pushed me to actually become better at audio engineering, is because when I was younger I was like, I want to make a song, but why doesn't it sound like the songs that I like to listen to? And then I was like, oh my God, there's all these other things that need to be, I guess, messed with in order to make it sound a certain way. And then I started getting really deep into effects and EQs and compressors, and I'm not too much of a nerd about like brand or whatnot, but like the way that people employ them just does so much. You can do so much. And so much of my favorite music. Oh yeah, and then I was also getting really into sound system music, which is like because I DJ as well, right?
Yeah.
And DJing is like so fun because I can just share music that's beautiful to me and like make people dance and like have a good time. And it's really what inspired me on this album to like focus a bit more on the club, like add club tracks into the things. So like I'll play a few of them tonight actually at my showcase. Yes. I'll sing. Yeah, so I'll sing a few of them and I'm gonna make them feel like they're just a part of everything, you know, because they're a part of this landscape of music that my friends make and that people I look up to make. And that's the beautiful thing about getting to be a DJ, I guess, is like I get to show off all the music that inspires me. But yeah, the mixing and mastering is a huge part of like the way that I think about sound, because I also think that I also work in live sound. That's like my day job. I work at a few venues around town, and thinking about the way that people understand and perceive and receive music is so much to do with how it's mixed and how it's presented to them. Like, for example, music that has the vocal really loud often is like music that's focused on lyricism. Music that has the bass really loud is focused on dance. Music that has like music that's like really acoustic and open is often focused on the instrumentalists themselves. So all of those things I was thinking about when I was making this album, because I was like, okay, if I want people to dance to this, what do I need to do in order to make the mix danceable? Oh, I think I should do this and this and this, and like, oh, I want this song's lyrics to really stand out. Like, what should I do to make those lyrics feel huge? You know, all of those things came to like influence, I guess. And I think I didn't do it. I've never done it any better than I did on Spyro, to be honest. That song is like the most. I'm so proud of it.
It's really powerful.
I touched everything I wanted to touch with it. So
That's the best feeling, when like you look at your work and you can say, this is everything I wanted it to be at.
Yeah, I mean, I'll always, be able to hear all of the little mistakes, because I can't ever turn my brain off. But I'm glad about that, because I wouldn't want to settle ever.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, that's a song I'm really proud of. So that feels cool. I was actually a radio DJ for 4 years.
Yeah. Did you do like
college radio
at Harvard?
Yeah.
That's dope.
Yeah, and I played my first 2 years. I did the Record Hospital, which is like the punk and like DIY music department.
Ooh.
Yeah, which was great. So we'd book shows, and we'd also we'd like play a bunch of like smaller, no label kind of music on the radio, which was awesome. And it was also like a lot of punk history that I learned about. And we had a really awesome collection like of vinyl and stuff. And then I switched over to the darker side, which is more like electronic and rap and stuff. And I was playing, I played like a all vinyl set of, I started digging through their records, and I found a bunch of like house and techno records. And I was getting really into house at that time. House was what brought me in first. I was getting really into house and techno, and then I was like, whoa. And then I started playing that a lot more. And then, I did that for 2 years, just all vinyl every Sunday, which was awesome. But all of that was just like, I was just like exploring the kind of music that had been made before me. And the kind of music that was being made then, even, because I played some modern stuff as well. And I would be like, wow, it was just such a beautiful experience to like listen to a record that was pressed in like 1987 and played on the radio and be like, whoa, like this is so, like, listen to the bass on that, or like, wow, oh my god, this groove is insane, or like, wow, these vocals are so beautiful. And like, I started to think about music as like a historical thing more than I had ever had before. And that was wonderful, because I was digging I would be playing like records from like divas from the 70s, or like, unknown punk bands from the 90s, or all of these things were like just ways to catalog real people's lives, I guess, and their experiences. It's beautiful. I mean, having each time I would pull a record out, and I collect records now, right? I'm like a vinyl DJ. I do vinyl and digital, but like every time I find a vinyl record, I'm like, wow, like where's this been? All of the places it's been, and it still plays beautifully. And I've played vinyl at like some clubs here in Austin that are like huge and have really big sound systems. And the feeling of like, I'm like watching the needle move along the record, and then like hearing like just a wall of sound in the room, and I'm like, whoa, how is this possible?
Right.
I'm a big sound system nerd. I'm really a sound system nerd too. Just some of the influence that I take most often is like from like Jamaican culture, and like they have sound clashes and stuff. So they would like be making dub records, and they would be playing them on these massive home, like hand-built sound systems that were like engineered by different people, and they would have teams of people that would like make these sound systems. And a lot of them, the focus is really on the bass. They want to completely shake the room, and then they have stacks on top, and all of them are custom, and all of them sound slightly different. And there's people here in Austin who are like really love sound systems as well. And there's a Club Eternal, which is like a club that I get to play at a lot, which I'm very grateful for. They have like a Danley audio sound system, and it's just so beautiful. It has like, massive bass, and then the highs aren't ever too crazy, but they're so present, and you can hear all of the really crisp stuff. And getting to play music on that is like, I had my release show at Club Eternal, So
awesome.
shout out to Club. They're great people. They're really, really wonderful people. They come from like a DIY ethos. They put on locals all the time. It's they are dedicated to like creating a space for people to dance and be free. They don't have a liquor license, so they don't sell alcohol. It's BYOB. So there's like kind of less pressure to like buy drinks or anything. It's more about like come, pay entry so we can pay the artists and dance. But yeah, do you have any like last questions?
Honestly, no. This was a really fantastic conversation. I'm really glad I reached out to you. And
I'm really glad you reached out to me too. It's cool to meet you. Okay, ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Hi, this is Lucía Beyond, and you're listening to WHUS Stores 91.7 FM.
Yay!
Yay!
That was